if you guys have this, but in our family, and I assume maybe this is the way with most marriages, where one of you guys is the rule follower and the other one is not the rule follower. Is our family the only one like that, or is there other people where is that right? So my wife, if you guys know her, she's definitely not the rule follower. I'm the guy that really wants to follow the rules. Not at all. Like, it really is probably one of our most problematic things in our marriage. And when we first got married, it was a really big deal because what would happen is my wife just didn't understand me. And I'm like, well, why? Like, that would always be my question, like, why? And so I would do things, and my wife's like, because that's the rule. And then the problem is my father-in-law is like the rule follower. And so I'm not the rule follower, right? So we got into a big argument one time because I pulled up to the gas station and I wouldn't turn off the car because I'm like, doesn't make sense, right? Like, people drive in here, they might have a sign, but if everyone's driving in here, then cars don't just explode, so I can leave my car when it's cold. No, the rule, the sign says it, so we got into a big argument. Anyway, this is my life, right? So I'm just one of the guys' wives. So this happened this summer, so I have a business partner, and every year we try to get our families together to go on a trip, just trying to get together, and so it was the three of us, and we had gone on this trip, and he's this big kid at heart. So we said, what are we going to do this year? And so we said, we're going to go on a cruise with Disney. This is going to be awesome. We're excited. And everyone's like, yay. And my wife's like, okay, well, maybe one night we can go to, like, they have these like real fancy dinners you can go to. And I'm like, great, let's do that. That'll be fun. We can leave the kids in some sort of space that we don't know where they're at, and we'll just go to this really nice dinner. So I'm like, great. And so she's reading the rules of like, well, okay, well, we got this booked. And you have to wear like a suit and tie, or you have to wear like, I'm like, yeah, that's not happening. So I'm like, no, I wear jeans and boots, that's just what I do, and now I wear dad sandals, but that's a whole other situation. So I had said, no, we'll be fine, all right? And so my business partner doesn't like that scenario either, and so he calls me and says, what are you going to do? And I'm like, I'm wearing jeans and boots. And Josh is my other partner over here, and he may be the rule follower, which is good, right? I need someone to make sure that I'm not always screwed up. So, he followed the rules, right? So me and my friend, we were like, no, we're not going to do it. His wife had said, that's not the rule. And he said, no, it's okay because Paul's doing it, right? Which is typical, right? And so what happened was we show up to this, it's the fanciest dinner I've ever been to, right? Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, it's one of those deals where, like, they had it all synchronized and you didn't know what they were doing. The meals were this big, and they kept just bringing them out, right? And so we show up, and I was proud of myself because I made it all the way to sitting down in the reception area before they told me I couldn't wear my jeans. And my partner walked up, and it was like immediately like, no, you got to go. So I'm like, we're literally on a boat in the middle of the ocean, and I'm going, I don't have any pants, right? We've already got reservations. We already missed. Like, he's like, no, we got this covered for you. We're going to give you pants. And I'm like, now, this is me going, I didn't follow the rules, and now I'm getting in trouble for it, which is not supposed to happen, right? So I'm literally going, the name of the restaurant was Remy. I'm like, Remy 1, me 0, right? So like, I'm there, and my wife's going, oh, I can't believe this. And so they give us these pants to put on, and so we have to go and change them. And so like, you tell them their size, and they let you have pants. But I'm kind of frustrated at this point. And they're like, they don't know how tall you are, so there's these big pants. And I'm like, they're not going to win, right? I'm going to win this situation. And so back to me, goes back to grade school when, I don't know if you guys are too young, so the dad sandal guys, we had this cool thing called the tight roll, where you could basically roll through pants, but then you like made them tight so you could put them up to here, but they stayed. So I'm walking into this fancy restaurant with my boots on and these crazy socks and the tight roll going, all right, well, if you're going to make me wear pants, I'm going to do it my way, right? And so that's literally how we have it. And they're just sitting, picture the nicest restaurant you've been in. That's me with the tight roll pants, right? So at this point, I'm feeling like Paul 1, Remy 1, right? So we're even. They didn't understand how I eat, and most of that landed up on pants anyway, so it was really Paul 2. So I won the scenario. So that's really how that went down. What's the point of my story? Not much. But except for the fact that I don't really necessarily follow the rules. And I was going to say, like, there's an outline that we have, right? Like, I just got in trouble because used to be we had 3 songs, and then we did our response, and then we had 3 more songs, and that's how, well, apparently the rules changed. But when we teach, we're supposed to go over, Samuel 13 through 14. That's what we're supposed to teach, and then I'm going to go do the giddy up at the end, and we'll go through all that. We're going to change all this up. All right, so what we're going to do today is we're going to go through the end part, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to get into Samuel. And I want to do that specifically because I think it's going to open up the scripture for us, right? So does that make sense? So we're going to change this up a little bit. We're going to be in Samuel, but we're going to read that towards the end because I want us to go through some things in order for us to really understand that scripture, okay? So that's my point. Where we're going to be today is, we'll be in Samuel, but first, before we get into that, we're going to be in Daniel. Let me get this thing turned on. And really what we're going to be talking about this today, just so you guys can kind of get to know the answer before we jump in here, is we're going to talk about a life that God has called us to trust in, right? That's what God has called us to do. He sees it over and over. We see in the entire book of Samuel, God asks us to just trust him, okay? But we can also be confident in the fact that not only does he ask us to trust us, that he's going to allow for us to have the opportunity to be tested in whether or not we're going to trust him. Right? Those are two facts in life that we can just accept. When we become a Christian, God is going to teach us. He's going to say, trust me. And then he's going to give us opportunities to see if we actually do that. Right? And that's what we're going to be spending time with. And one of my favorite verses, my wife loves this verse. We're going to be in Daniel 3, 16, 18 real quick. So everybody turn there because this is kind of the start of what we're talking about. It's this idea. So what was going on in Daniel was Nebuchadnezzar was king of Babylon, and he had made this idol, right? And he had said, okay, everyone's going to bow down before it. You guys know this scripture, right? He said, you're going to bow down before it. And there's three guys that said, no, we're not. And so Daniel 3:16, I'll wait till all the iPads stop turning. All right, so we've got that. 3:16 through 18. It says, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing fire, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of God you have set up. And that verse is so powerful. And the verse is so powerful, why? Right? Why is this verse so powerful? Is this idea that two things. Number one, is there is a faith here that understands no matter what our circumstances is, our God is bigger than that circumstance, right? But then there's also the understanding in this faith that it doesn't matter whether or not he manifests himself in the way that we think he's going to manifest himself. Even if he does not, our God is still big. Now that right itself, that concept, in theory, sounds good on paper. In practicality, it gets really, really difficult, right? Because here's the reality. Here's the reality in your life and in my life is there's a lot of things that we have to deal with, right? There's a lot of things that God says, I want you to trust me in this matter. I want you to step forward and walk in faith. And very often those circumstances are difficult, and it gets very difficult in our eyes because we think, I will do that, but only if, right? If you do this, I will be willing to do that. And that's not what God's calling to us. And he says, I want you to do this. I want you to walk in faith. I want you to trust me, right? And these things are important. And when we walk through the idea that God is calling us to step in faith and trust, the reality we have to come to is when he allows us to be tested, and we either accept that and we do it with humbleness and what God's called us to, or we don't. Either way, there's going to be consequences to that, right? Sometimes it's going to be good in the standpoint we've walked with God. It might not turn out the way we want it to, but there's going to be consequences. Or we can say, no, God, I'm not going to do that, and the consequences are still going to come, right? Now, these consequences often, right, they're not just related to me, but they're related to the people around us, and they also can be related to even just our children or our children's children. I mean, they have everlasting expansion of the choices that we make, right? We have to understand that because that's what we're dealing with. So, if we do understand that, all right, if we do understand that, and we still decide to say no, why is it? Why do we understand that these things have consequences? God's going to call us to this. It's not a surprise. He's going to ask me to trust him. He's going to put me to a test. I know there's going to be consequences to this, and I still have a decision, or still want to go through the action of saying no. And I had to say, why? Why do we do that, right? And the reality I came to is, I believe that there's a fear factor, right? It comes down to fear. It comes down to whether or not we trust that, and how much do we trust, and what's the consequences, and we just have this fear. So if we can learn to get or deal with this fear in a biblical and a correct way, then maybe, just maybe, we can understand and be able to walk through that trust. Does that kind of make sense? And I know I've talked about this in the past, because there's this scene in the movie, and I gave this to Brian just a minute ago. Don't do this. If you're ever teaching up here, Brian needs at least 3 weeks' notice. He's got to have certain emails that you send it to him. So do that. Don't walk in and say, hey, can you play this real quick for me? Thanks, Brian.
That's one.
So anyway, there's a scene in a movie that I love, okay? Because to me, it has this spiritual meaning that's just so deep. I've talked about it in the past. I know I've talked about it in our men's study. But I want to play that, and we'll kind of jump on that. So Brian, can you play that for me real quick?
Lieutenant, sir, when I landed on D-Day, I found myself in the ditch all by myself. I fell asleep. I think it was air sickness pills, I guess. When I woke up, I didn't really try to find my unit to fight. I just kind of stayed put.
What's your name, Trevor?
I'm Blythe, sir. Howard Blythe.
You know why you hid in that ditch, Blythe?
I was scared.
We're all scared. You hid in that ditch because you think there's still a hope. But Blythe, the only hope you have is to accept the fact that you're already dead. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you'll be able to function as a soldier's supposed to function. All war depends upon it.
I love that concept as we talk about this spiritual thing that we deal with when we accept Christ. We have an insurance company, Josh and I do, and the name of that insurance company is Warrior, and we were actually dealing with some marketing guys. Well, would you change it? And we're like, you don't understand. We have that for a purpose, and it was this idea that regardless of how we know it, we're in a battle, right? God has called us to be His soldiers, His people that have an opportunity to follow Him and to be a part of something greater than ourselves. And it's a reminder to us about that concept. And so, until we really realize what God has called us to do, and the fact that we've turned from this one world, these desires and these opportunities, and we've said, no, I want what you want. I choose you. I choose your way. I choose an eternal perspective versus a worldly perspective. My hope of what today looks like is it's not there. It's dead. My hope is what tomorrow looks like in the future, right? Like, that's a total different concept. And this idea of what holds us back is this idea of fear, right? When we moved here, it was 2010, and I had finished law school, and my wife and I had decided, we wanted to figure out where we wanted to be. And so we had traveled the country. We felt God was pulling us away from where we were at. We decided to move here. So I moved here. I had started a couple companies. I was going, the job that I had, I could sense that was just gone, right? And so I was in this world of a new place, realizing where God had called me to be. I sensed like we were just new. It was a difficult scenario, and I really started dealing with some fear, right? I had some anxiety, and I know there are people in the room that know what I'm talking about, right? Like, I'm here, God's called me here, and I'm afraid, right? That's where I was at. And so what I did was, it was our first men's study we had, and so we used to have men's study, we do these semesters, and so I said, let's do this topic on fear. And there was probably 6 or 7 of us. I don't know if Matt's here. I remember Matt being there. I don't even think Dan was there. In fact, Josh wasn't here yet. So we had done this study on fear. And really what I wanted to do is kind of do a high level of that to kind of understand really what I learned through that. Because I know that when I'm dealing with this idea of trusting God, if I don't deal with the idea of dealing with fear, it's really hard. Because then ultimately when we trust God, we have to get over something. And what is that? It's our fear, right? That's what it comes down to. I've got to have more of a fear in this situation than the fear of of not doing it. So with that, we've got some verses to jump in. I'm going to need some help here. It looks like I've got about 8 verses. So I need about 8 volunteers that wouldn't mind reading just a few verses for me. So who minds reading a couple verses for me? Anyone? You got first one? All right, so you're going to be at John 16:33. You've got Luke 9:23, Matthew 11:28 through 30, 1 John 4:18, Dave back in the back, Matthew 10:28, and then you're going to be on 2 Corinthians 7:1. 2 more. Psalms 147:11, and then 1 more. Thanks. Luke 1:50. All right. Everyone's going to remember what they had, right? All right. Who's got John 16:33?
I have told you these things so that you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I will come forward.
All right. So we've got 2 things going on in that. First one, we're talking about peace and trouble. They seem to be opposites, right? What peace is he talking about? Any ideas? An internal peace? Like, not peace, maybe we have troubles, right? It's okay to have troubles, but I'm still going to be at peace with that, correct? All right, so he's promises that. All right, who's got the next verse? Luke 9:23.
Then he said to them all, if anyone wants to follow after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me.
So he's called us to have peace, but he's also said we're going to have to stop doing things that we want to do, right? And I think it's interesting. He says we're going to take up our cross, right? He didn't say we're going to take up our unicorns and rainbows, right? He said our cross, which, that's a difficult scenario. Jesus came down his cross, where he had the burden of, representing the burden of what he was given, the task that he was given. So God's going to give us tasks that are going to be difficult. But the verse before said he's also going to give us peace with it, correct? All right, who's got the next one? Good question. Yeah, Matthew.
Okay, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I'm going to rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Who else, we know we've known this verse, but who else reads that verse and has always been like, that sounds made up, right? Like, in the verse before, we talked about taking up this cross. Okay, I might be at peace with it, but then we talked about, read that last, verse 30 again.
For my yoke is easy and my burden is light.
Right? Like, does that not, just in my mindset, you're telling me to take up a cross. Okay, I might be at peace with it, but that sounds like it may be hard, right? And then I read verses and it says, but it's easy, right? What I ask you to do, you can give it to me and it's easy, right? All right, who keeps reading? Let's go, 1 John 4:18. Who had that? Okay. So God has promised us, right, that we're going to have peace. He's promised us he's going to give us difficult things. He promises if we lay it before him, it's going to be easy. And now he's also promised us the fact that we don't need to fear, right? We don't need to be afraid of this, okay? Now, who's got the next one? Matthew 10:28.
Do not be afraid of those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body.
Wait. Now he says be afraid, to have fear. So first of all, he said don't have fear, and now he's going back to have fear. But what does he tell us to have fear of? Who? The Lord, right? Let's keep reading on that. Who's got 2 Corinthians 7:1?
Therefore, having these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God.
Fear fear of God. Mine uses the word reverence. It's this concept of who God is, right? If you go look, there's over 300 verses that talk about fearing God. Our God, and Johnny had a beautiful saying yesterday, or last time he talked, and he was talking about I'm paraphrasing because I've slept since then, but it was this idea that God is who God is, and he demands us to worship and honor him, right? You can't take that away. If we say demand and honor me, well, that doesn't make any sense. But because God is who he is, it is demanded by his own personality. In fact, the fact that we have free choice is in direct relationship to the fact of who God is, right? He gives us that because he's so powerful, he's such a mighty, he's such God that he understands that the choice to honor him is it because of who he is. That's why he's given us this choice. Let's keep reading. We've got a couple more on this. Psalms 147 and Luke 150. Who's got 147?
The Lord delights in those who fear him, who put their hope in his unfailing love.
And then Luke 150.
And his mercy is for those who fear him, from generation to generation.
This concept. And I'm going to read 1 Samuel 12:24. It's how we end it before we get into Samuel 13. And it says, be sure to fear the Lord. So remember what happened anybody remember what happened last time? Right? Israel was finally given a king. Samuel was sick. He basically said, I don't think you should do this, but God's done this. I'm going to pray for you. I'm still going to show mercy on you. You have a king now. Let me give you leave with this. And so this is what he leaves on. It says, be sure to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Consider what great things he's done. He's taken care of you. He's shown mercy on you. I want you to fear the Lord. Yet if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will perish. That's what he leaves us in chapter 12. So what do you think we're going to be talking about in chapter 13 and 14? Testing that, maybe? Yeah. He said, do this, fear God, right? If you do these things are going to happen. You honor God. If you don't, bad things are going to happen, right? So, next verse, this is what we're dealing with. So, we're in Samuel 13. Before we do that, I'm going to tell you kind of a story. We're doing time here. We were at a conference 2 weeks ago, maybe, and it was this really, really neat story. And we're sitting there, and before the conference started, there's about 400 attorneys in the room. I go to a conference once a year, and there was this lady up here, and she was going to speak to us. And she was a survivor of Auschwitz. Is that right? That's how you pronounce it? The German concentration camp. Okay, so she was kind of telling her story, which you get a 90-year-old who has full capacity, who is extremely humble and funny, sitting in front of a room. It demands attention, right? It just demanded attention, right? So you're hearing the story. So she goes in and she's telling her story, right? Let me tell you what happened. And I'm paraphrasing, obviously, and she was really funny. She's telling about her mom being taken away, her mom dying, her dad being taken away, and she's seeing this and the struggles that she had, right? Like, this is someone who knows things that I couldn't imagine, right? And so she's telling the story, and we're just amazed. And so she goes in and she's talking about these things, and she had a great, funny sense of humor. Since she had gotten out, since she had became a doctor in psychology, so she had dedicated her life to just helping people. She was really funny. She was talking about, she had a doctor call up, and he was dealing with drugs and stuff, and he had a conversation when he called her back, said, well, I thought about what you said and how they didn't have Prozac and wherever it is. It meant a lot to me. So she's really funny. But she told a couple stories that really stuck home to me. And she had this whole idea about, do we respond or do we react? If we react, somebody says something, someone does something, we have this reaction, right? If we respond, it's a thought out, it's what I want to do versus just the immediateness, right? Does that make sense? So she's telling these two stories, and the two stories she's told, she was in the concentration camp, and somehow they had moved her. I think the Allies were moving in, and they had moved her back into Germany. So she was now in Germany. The war was closing down. She had been in a concentration camp. She was tired. All those things. She had developed. Her sister was with her, and she was one that was trying to take care of her sister because her sister was really on the verge of potentially dying, and she was really, really making an effort. She got 2 meals a day, and she'd give one of the meals to her sister. Just because her sister needed her. And she was telling this story, and they were stuck in this house in Germany, And basically, they couldn't leave, and her sister was about to die of hunger. So she made a decision she was going to leave the house and try to go get some food for her sister. Now, she's in Germany, war's going on, so she sneaks across the road, and she kind of got down this bank, and she was taking some carrots out of a garden. And she was coming back, and a German soldier stopped her, right? She's going to die. She says, you know, and she was a Christian at the time, and she was also a Jew, right? So she said, I was just praying for the soldier. Not for me, I was praying for the soldier. And the soldier basically let her go, right? So the soldier didn't kill her, was going to, had a gun, let her go, goes back into the house, right? Which is pretty amazing. Well, the next day, the soldier shows up at the house and says, who was it that left, right? So now you got a room full of people, and everyone's scared because, you know, they're always at, what's the next day? Am I going to die? And she steps forward, and the soldier says, you must have been very hungry to do what you did. And so he hands her like a loaf of bread or some sort of food, right? Now keep in mind, we're dealing with Germany, the war's going on, no one had food. Like it wasn't like, you're at that crunch time, like this wasn't, and here was a soldier, and she, you know, she's sitting here going, I wish I could have met him again. Because the impact that person, my enemy, had on my life, impactful, right? And here was the situation. That soldier responded and reacted, right? That was scary for that soldier, right? If they would have seen him let him leave, he could have been killed. It was a big deal, but he responded, and it had an impact on her life. So she's telling that story, which was pretty amazing, and she tells another story. She says, you know, later on in life, she'd become a doctor, she'd been a psychologist, and she was in a room, and she was dealing with a young child, or a boy, and the boy was not doing, he's been in his position, and he goes off and starts telling about how we need to bring this back to white America, and all these people need to be killed, the Jews need, like, really goes off, right? And she's telling the story, right? He doesn't know who she is, has no idea. And she's hearing these things that are just terrible. And it would have been very easy for her to just be like, let me tell you something. You know, that's a hard place to be, right? That's a test. That is a place where you're going, how do I respond? And she goes, you know what? I thought about it, and I said, tell me more. That was her response. Tell me more, right? So she responded to the situation. Come out to find out the kid was like a teenager who had been stuck in the Davis Koresh compound and was in this just cult situation, and she was trying to save his life. And so she's telling these stories about being tested and how people respond. It was quite amazing. So I'm in the room, and then she goes on to, like, as she's closing out, she goes, let me tell you about Jesus, right? I'm not even kidding. And everyone, like, what are they doing? Well, I have to listen to you. You're 90 years old. Like I'm going to hear what you say. I'm going to listen to every single word. She says, let me tell you the things I love about Jesus. She says, you know what? Jesus tried to be all things to all people. You know, it's like it didn't matter who it was. He wanted to be able to relate to that person. And that just means something to me. And he says, you know what the other thing Jesus does? Is Jesus teaches us to love our neighbors ourselves. Here's a person who had been through all of that, right? And the way she chooses to respond, the way she chooses to trust God, says, God's got that. It was amazing, amazing testimony, right? So I'm hearing that, and I'm like, man, it's hard, right? So that's what I'm hearing. I think it's amazing. That's where we're starting at. So I want us to jump into Samuel. Oh, we got about 20 minutes here. We're going to jump into Samuel real quick. Samuel 13, all right? So we've got, I'm going to read that. We'll kind of go through it. But I want us to have those eyes. And then I think one of the cool things about this, if we can understand this idea of fear, we can understand the idea that really what God's called us to do is just to fear him and trust in him, right? To just put everything inside and say, God, what do you want? If I can really get to that point, then I can read this a lot differently. I can understand what they're asking us to do, because what he's asking us to do and what we've seen here is really difficult. He says, Saul was 30 years old when he became a king, and he reigned over Israel for 42 years. And so Saul was 30, was 42 years. Saul chose 3 men from Israel. 2,000 were with him at Michmash and in the hill country of Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan at Gibeah and Benjamin. The rest of the men he sent back to their homes. So this is really our first look at one person, Jonathan, right? Jonathan is probably one of the most, if not the most amazing pillar of a man you'll ever read in the New Testament. I mean, the Old Testament. He is unbelievably God. We're going to see a little bit of glimpse in him in the future, but you're not going to meet a more amazing man who has faith with God in that. He's also was the first in line. So this is the prince, right? This is the oldest son. He's the prince. He's the next one that's in line to be king. This is our first mention of him. And it says, Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost at Gibeah, and the Philistines heard about it. And then Saul had the trumpet blown throughout the land and said, let the heroes hear. So this is kind of our first victory with the Philistines. Saul's kind of bragging about his soldiers have gone out there and done these things. And what happened was, so all Israel heard the news. Saul had attacked the Philistine outpost, and now Israel had become obnoxious to the Philistines. And the people were summoned to join Saul in Gilgal. So remember, he had sent some people home. He'd awakened the giants. Here it is. We're about to see the really first test, right? Where he had conquered, and this is where we're at. Now, I want to jump this in, and let's go back and talk about Saul real quick. Two things with Saul. We've learned in the past that when Saul became king, do you guys remember when he was first about to be appointed a king, that the Spirit came on Paul, and they didn't recognize Paul. The Spirit came on Saul, and they didn't recognize him, right? They're like, who is this guy that's prophesizing? They didn't recognize him. And then there was this battle that was supposed to be fought, like they had come back, and they were going to threaten to take out an eye, and he came in to the rescue, and he wins, and all the people were there. He had some things going his way. At this point, God had blessed him. He knew that God was with him, and he also knew that the people, he'd given him victory, so he had some positive, some things that were going with him. All right, so for verse 5, the Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as sands of the seashore. They went up to camped at Michmash, east of Beth Aven. So, how many people did the Israelites have? 3,000, right? How many people did the Philistines have? I couldn't even name them, right? They had a chariot for every person, right? I've seen Braveheart. This doesn't work out well, right? Like the reality here is, I was talking to Johnny today, and he was like, we read the book and we talk about Saul, and it's really quick for us to go, that guy's an idiot. Right? Like, oh, he didn't trust God, he didn't do that. You've got 3,000 men, right? And you're going against numbers that you can't even imagine, with a chariot for every man and 2 people in that chariot, right? How do you respond? Because that's the reality of the situation. All right, let's keep reading. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. I think that is some understatement here. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, bring me the burnt offerings and the fellowship offerings, and Saul offered up the burnt offerings. So here's what had happened. Samuel had said, go here, I will come, I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to give the sacrifice. Saul's over here, and he's looking across, and he's going, we're in trouble, right? Not just that we're in trouble, but there is absolutely, positively no way we're going to win this, right? That's the reality. Right? That's what he was looking at. And so what did he do? He based a decision based off of fear, right? I'm afraid, the men are afraid, we've got to do something. So what does he do? He does something he's not supposed to do, right? He had asked for, and he had done the sacrifice, and who was supposed to do the sacrifice? The priests, the Levites, right? They're not supposed to do that. He did it. Can understand, right? I'm scared too. I need God. What do? Didn't wait. So Samuel comes in the picture, and he says, you've done a foolish thing, Samuel. You have not kept the commands the Lord God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. Uh-oh. What happens? God's asked us to trust him. We decided to do something different. That has consequences. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart and appointed him ruler of his people because you have not kept the Lord's commands. This is a big deal, right? It's a big deal because we know that God's going to call us to trust him, right? He's going to put us in a place that he's asked us to trust him, and then on top of that, he's also going to allow us to be tested. And we need to understand that when we choose either to obey or not to obey, that there are significant consequences, and we're going to see that. And unfortunately, it ended up costing his family, is what happened with that. I lost my place here. All right, here we go. And then Samuel left Gilgal and went up to Gibeah and Benjamin, and Saul counted the men who were with him. Did I miss something there? Nope, I didn't. All right, there we go. And counted them in the number about 600. All right, so now what happened? How many do you have? 3,000? Now how many does he have? 600, right? So now it's even looking worse. Okay, now let's flip the page here. Who do we have coming in? We've got Saul and Jonathan, right? Saul and his son Jonathan and the men were with him staying in Gibeah and Benjamin, with the Philistines camped at Michmash. Raiding parties went out from the Philistine camp in 3 detachments. One turned toward Oprah in the vicinity of Shaw, another towards Beth Horon, and a third towards the borderland overlooking the valley of Zeboim, facing the wilderness. Not a blacksmith could be found in the whole land of Israel, because the Philistines had said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. So all Israel went down to the Philistines to have their plows points, mattocks, axes, and sickles sharpened. The price was 2/3 a shekel for sharpening plow points and mattocks, and 1/3 of shekel for sharpening forks and axes for pointing goads. So on that day, the battle, not a soldier with Saul or Jonathan had a sword or spear in his hand. Only Saul and his son Jonathan had them. If we thought it was bad before, right, now we keep reading, and not only was there now only 600 people, they didn't even have a sword, right? That's the reality they find in them, all right? So I don't even think we can really fathom what's going on. There's thousands of people. We can't even name how many people. There's 600 men without swords. That's where they are. Watch Jonathan's response, because it gets awesome here. Now a detachment, oh sorry, I kept reading that. Is that where we're at? I keep flipping this. Not a detachment of Philistines had gone out to the pass of Michmash. One day, Jonathan, son of Saul, said to his young armor bearer, come, let us go over to the Philistines' outpost on the other side. But he did not tell his father. Saul was staying on the outskirts of Gibeah, I think I did that right, under a pomegranate tree in Migron. With him were about 600 men, among whom was Ashiah, who was wearing an ephod, supposed to be a priest. He was the son of Ichabod's brother, Acheb's son of Phinehas, and the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh. No one was aware that Jonathan had left. On each side of the pass that Jonathan intended to cross to reach the Philistine outpost was a cliff. One was called Bozez and the other Shineah. One cliff stood to the north toward Michmash, the other towards the south towards Geba. So Jonathan said to his young armor bearer, come, let's go over to the outpost to those uncircumcised men. Perhaps the Lord will act on our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from the saving, whether by many or by few. All right, so there's 2 cliffs, right? And so the Philistines are on one side, he's on one side. He's got 600 people. He's got a sword, no one else does, right? What is his response versus what Saul's response was? Right? Saul is scared. Jonathan takes a completely different approach. The reality is, I can't understand this, right? I understand Saul, right? He literally had not a sword. And so what he says, let's go over there and see what happens, because I trust my God so much that I don't have to worry about it. Let's see what he does. Let's see what he is. Even though I've got nobody, so his armor goes with him. And I love this because it says, this is the response from his armor bearer. It says, all that you have in mind, his armor bearer said, go ahead, I am with you, heart and soul. We all need dumb friends, right? Like, we all need someone that, like, we're going to go do this. I love his response here. So Jonathan said, come on, then we will cross over toward them and let them see us. If they say to us, wait there until we come to you, we will stay with it where we are and not go up to them. But if they say, come to us, we will climb up, because that will be our sign that the Lord has given us into our hands. So he trusted his God. He said, let's go see what God does. And then he says, God, let us know what you want us to do, right? I'm here for you. I trust you. I will wait on you. You're in control. And since both of them showed themselves to the Philistine outpost, basically they went over there and started telling jokes, right? Like, you know, I could just see the situation where they're like, they totally trusted in God. They're kind of letting the Philistines see them. It says, look, said the Philistines, the Hebrews were crawling out the holes they were hiding in. The men of the outpost shouted to Jonathan, his armor bearer, come up to us, we will teach you a lesson. What does Jonathan do? So Jonathan said to his armor, climb after me. The Lord has given them to the hands of Israel. Not even a hesitation, right? He's got nothing. He's got a sword. There's the Philistines' outpost there. He's like, let's go do this. So Jonathan climbed up using his hands and feet with his armor bearer right behind him. Now, why do you think it says it like that? Right? He's climbing up this mountain. If I'm using my hands and my feet, right? Where's my sword? Not in my hands and my feet, right? Like, now, I don't know a whole lot about war, but I'm thinking to myself, high ground is important, right? So they don't have high ground. I probably want my weapon in my hand. I don't know how this all happened, but he climbs up there because he believes in his God. He's got trust in his God. Let's see what God does. Jonathan climbs up. The Philistines fell before Jonathan's armor bearer, followed and killed him. In the first attack, Jonathan and his armor bearer killed some 20 men in an area of about a half acre. Amazing. Amazing faith, right? We see God there, but I think it gets even more amazing when we keep reading. Then panic struck the whole army. Those in the camp and the fields and those in the outposts and raiding parties, and the ground shook. It was panic sent by God. And we're going to... I think this concept of God does not need us to fight his battles. Right? He is more than capable of taking care of the problems in our life, the situations that he's laid in front of us. He does not need us to do that. What does God want? He wants us to walk in faith, right? He's not asking us to win the battle. He's asking for us to just trust him. And if we can deal with that fear issue, and we can get over that, and we can recognize that, yes, my God has the power to do it. He's just waiting along. He'd probably set that earthquake in place thousands of years ago that was going to happen at that moment. Like, he knew, he had control of the situation, but he wanted to see how we responded. Saul looked out at Gibeah and Benjamin, saw the army melting away in all directions. Then Saul said to the men who were with him, muster the forces and see who has left us. When they did, it was Jonathan and his armor bearer who were not there. So he finds out who it is. Saul said to Ahijah, bring the ark. At the time, while Saul was taking the priest, the tumult in the Philistine camp increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. Then Saul and all his men assembled and went to the battle. They found the Philistines in total confusion, striking each other with the swords. Those Hebrews who had previously been with the Philistines had gone up with them to their camp, went over to the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. When all the Israelites who had hidden in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were on the run, they joined the battle in hot pursuit. So on that day the Lord saved Israel, and battle moved on beyond Beth-aven. Amazing. God is taking care of it. He's just asking us to trust us. Now, we're going to continue to read, and we're going to see the difference between Saul and Jonathan, and there's a heart issue, and really we're going to see the difference between Saul and David that's going to come on the scene. It says, now the Israelites were in distress that day because Saul had bound the people under an oath, saying, cursed be anyone who eats food even before evening comes, before I have avenged myself on my enemies. So none of the troops had tasted food. This kind of reminded me of the story of Gideon, right? Do you guys remember the story of Gideon? What happened with Gideon? God had called him to fight a battle, right? And he had too many soldiers. And so Gideon didn't want to do it. And he was scared. And he kept saying, God, show me that you're here. So God did, and finally gave him proof that he was asking him to do this. And then God started dwindling his army. He's like, God, we need as many people as we can. But the big difference here between Gideon and Saul was who had asked the army to be dwindled. It was God. God was telling Gideon because God wanted to prove himself. Here, Saul doesn't get it. He never gets it. He tries to act and he tries to react. And so I'm not even sure his reasoning for what he did, but he ends up telling the people not to eat. Not a really good decision. You're about to go into battle. Probably won't have a full belly. That kind of comes out. The entire army entered the woods, and there was honey on the ground. When they went into the woods, they saw the honey oozing out, yet no one put his hand in his mouth because they feared the oath. But Jonathan had not heard that his father had bound the people with the oath, so he reached out to the end of the staff that was in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb. He raised it in his mouth, and his eyes brightened. Why hadn't Jonathan heard that? Because why? Because he was actually doing something, right? So he hadn't heard that. He had no intention. This is where Jonathan's at. The one soldier told him, "Your father bound the army under a strict oath, saying, 'Cursed be anyone who eats food.' That is the law of men are faint." Jonathan said, "My father has made trouble for this country. See how my eyes brightened when I tasted a little of this honey? How much better would it have been if the men had eaten today some of the plunder they took from their enemies? Would not the slaughter of the people, Philistines, have been even greater?" He's like, dude, what are you doing, right? And so keep reading. That day after the Israelites had struck down the Philistines from Michmash to Ajalon, they were exhausted. They pounced the plunder and taken sheep, cattle, and calves. They butchered them and ground and ate them, together with blood. Then someone said to Saul, "Look, the men are sinning against the Lord by eating meat that has blood in it." "You have broken faith," he said. "Roll a large stone over here at once." Then he said, "Go out among the men and tell them, 'Each of you bring me your cattle, your sheep, you slaughtered them, and eat them. Do not sin against the Lord by eating meat with still on it.'" So everyone bought the ox night and slaughtered it there. Then Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first time he had done this. I thought that was an interesting statement. It was the first time he had built an altar, right? Why do I think that's important? Because I think it goes back to the heart of where Saul was, right? If I would have said, reading past, and we get to David, right? And you said, David stopped and prayed, or David stopped and worshiped. Would it say that was the first time David did that? No. Why not? Because that's who David was to the core, right? David trusted, David was a part of Christ, part of God. He was so much entwined with that was part of his life. It was funny because Josh and I were running this week, and we had gotten back because we were out there and exercising, and Josh started telling me kind of he'd been reading Samuel, and so I had to slow down so I could hear him because I was in front. So I slowed down, and so Josh gets it up with me and says, "You know what? I'm reading about Saul and David," and he says, it's this idea and this concept, because he was telling a story about why would I not do this? And he was saying, in our lives, and he was kind of talking about with our companies because we were having to deal with something. He goes, it gets so easy to get entangled in the problem that we forget to stop and bring God into that solution, right? We just want to deal with the problem, especially guys. Like we keep going. We go on to the next thing, and he's like, the story here is we need to just entrench God into the situation at all times. And I think the difference here, when you read the story, right, like you see Saul, he's like trying to do it, but he's doing it so poorly because he didn't have it as part of his life, right? And that's when you go back, and when we talked about earlier, when God said, "I'm going to remove you," who did he say he's going to place? He's going to place a man after his what? His own heart, right? Because that's the crux of the issue. If I can get to the heart of understanding what God's calling me and make him part of my life, things are going to look a lot differently. So Saul said, "Let's go down and pursue the Philistines by night and plunder them till dawn, and let us not leave us one of them alive." "Do what seems best to you," they replied. But the priest said, "Wait a minute, maybe we should bring God into the equation. Let us inquire of God here." So Saul asked God, "Shall I go down and pursue the Philistines? Will you give them into Israel's hands?" But God did not answer him that day. Why didn't God answer him? I think he was just frustrated with him. I think he was done. So Saul therefore said, "Come here, and all your leaders of the army, and let us find out what sin has been committed today. As surely as the Lord who rescues Israel lives, even if the guilt lies with my son Jonathan, he must die." But not one of them said a word. Saul then said to the Israelites, "You stand over there, and I, Jonathan, my son, will stand over here. Do what seems best to you," they replied. Then Saul prayed to the Lord, the God of Israel, "Why have you not answered your servant today? If the fault is in me or my son Jonathan, respond with your own. But the men of Israel are all at fault. Respond with them." Jonathan and Saul were taken by lot, and the men were cleared. Saul said, "Cast the lot between me and Jonathan my son." And Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." And so Jonathan told him, "I tasted a little honey with the end of my staff, and now I must die." I don't think it was, "and now I must," I think it was, are you kidding? Like I have just listened to God, I've trusted in God, you should be giving me a congressional medal of honor, and instead you're saying I should die. I think he was so frustrated. But the men said to Saul, "Should Jonathan die, he who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Never. As surely as the Lord lives, not a hair on his head will fall to the ground, for he did this day with God's help." So the men rescued Jonathan, and he was not put to death. I think we see this other just example of Saul not being a strong leader. Then Saul stopped pursuing the Philistines, and they withdrew to the land. After Saul had assumed rule over Israel, he fought against the enemies, and on every side, Moab, the Ammonites, Edom, the kings and of Zobah and the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he inflicted punishment on them. He fought valiantly, defending the Amalekites, delivering Israel from the hands of those who plundered them. So basically the rest of his kingship is going to be in fight. He goes on to talk about who his family is. I'm going to get the worship team to come up. I know we're running over. The reality is, we read these verses in the Old Testament, and we read about Samuel, and it's easy for us to go, yeah, you should have done that. But when we look at the situation, we realize that that's not as easy. And if we're in that situation, how difficult it is. And the reason I say this is because I know there are people in this room that God is calling them and is asking them to do things, and that God is asking them to trust in them. And that can be unbelievably difficult given the circumstances of what God is asking you to do, right? My circumstances, what God is calling me to trust Him with, may be significantly different than what He's calling you to trust Him with. And I don't know what burden He's put on you. I don't know where you are in your life, where God is saying, you just got to trust me with that. And I don't take that lightly, because I know there can be thousands and thousands of people in our minds that are battling the situation. We don't have a weapon. Right? And there's no way I'm going to win this. But the reality is we are called, and God knows that we've got a choice that we've got to make. And I encourage you, because the reality is if we can step with faith, I don't know what God's going to do with it. I don't know if it's going to turn out the way we want it to turn out with, but I know that's what He's asking of us. And I know that He honors that, and He wants you to be a part of that, because He does not need you to fight that battle, but He's calling you to just trust Him. Right? And that's the reality. When we look through the rest of Samuel, we'll even be able to look through with those lenses. Let's pray. God, Father, we just come before you, and we thank you so much for just the opportunity to be a part of your kingdom and be a part of the things that you've asked us. I just pray for everyone in this room, things that you've asked them to do. I pray that you encourage them, that you love on them, and you let them know that you're here, and that you're a God that's bigger than whatever things that you're asking them to walk through. And I pray that you just remove that fear from the circumstance, that they can just trust and know that their God is what to be feared. The problem is not to be feared, but their God is to be feared. And that you are just in charge of all things. And just give us the confidence to walk boldly and understanding that all we have to do is